Intercultural skills are mandatory in today's world in any profession, especially for those who are responsible for other people's performance. Even relatively straightforward jobs like serving meals in a restaurant can become a nightmare if one of the customers has some exotic ideas about what the food should look like and taste like, how fast it should arrive, and how much tip the staff should receive. When someone is promoted into a management position, that usually comes with more international exposure. Head chefs must negotiate with international suppliers and event organizers, IT team leaders with overseas developers and end users. The larger the team and the higher the job, the more international and the more intercultural it becomes. Many executives I coach work across a dozen time zones with a confusing collection of currencies, legal systems, and business traditions. There are lots of resources online to help master intercultural skills. Many managers I coached had already read Erin Meyer's classic The Culture Map or taken a course in cross-cultural communication. But they also found that if they wanted to aim for mastery, they first had to get the basics right. And when it comes to the fundamentals of intercultural skills for managers, I keep seeing three typical mistakes that can hijack someone's efforts to develop advanced skills to communicate and manage people across cultures. In this video, I'm going to show you what these three mistakes are and why people make them. I will share ways to avoid intercultural situations becoming awkward, and even turn each of these three typical mistakes into constructive skills to communicate and manage others in culturally challenging situations and take your skills to the next level. By the way, my name is Gabor Holch and I am an intercultural leadership coach, consultant and trainer. I spent 20 years living in Asia. I currently split my time between Europe and China. And I have recently published a book on international managers in China called Dragon Suit, whose link you can find in the show notes. Let's begin right away. The first and most basic mistakes that many managers make when they start working in a culturally challenging environment or they get promoted to a position with higher international exposure is to assume that in some professions, culture simply doesn't matter. As an executive coach, I get this attitude most often from managers with a finance background. People trained in financial operations have a tendency to believe that numbers are numbers and money is money, no matter whether they must manage, audit, or fund projects in France, Mexico, or Japan. But others also ignore the impact of cultural differences. For example, those who go into management from law, medicine, engineering, or some other professions where rules are strict and mistakes are seldom tolerated. Then, once they negotiate, cooperate, or try to provide great service in a culturally unfamiliar environment, they are very often shocked to realize how differently people handle their money, their regulations, their medications, and even engineering wonders like their software, their cars, their roads, depending on their cultural background. I deliberately use the word shock because culture shock is a serious source of stress and confusion that can undermine somebody's productivity and performance. The main reason for the mistake of ignoring culture in professional situations is that when people are in a culturally challenging situation, their instinct is to avoid confusion and keep using a familiar system of reference as long as they can. In other words, stay in their cultural comfort zone. And as cultural research has found, the professional areas that I mentioned are themselves subcultures with their own values, habits, and traditions. These professional areas are typically task-focused, meaning practical and result-orientated, as opposed to the people focus of service professions, for example. They are also responsive, typically meaning risk-averse, unlike proactive, flexible, and risk-seeking jobs like sales, marketing, or venture capital. Thinking that cultural differences do not matter because money, regulations, or building things are objective and fact-based can lead to many misunderstandings, especially when people from another culture see the same issues in a completely different way. Think about small issues in finance, like how would you report to your finance manager the tips that you give out on an international business trip? Or different cultural attitudes to different ways of paying money, like cash, check, credit card, and mobile payments. Now raise the bar and think about different cultural approaches to where financial flexibility ends and criminal behavior begins. A generous meal, an invitation to a retreat, or a valuable gift to an important business prospect is basic business etiquette in one society and punishable corruption in another. But culture in these seemingly objective professions is not always a bad thing. Culture and money, for example, often combine into innovative solutions like green investment or halal banking, which means financial services that do not violate the principles of Islam. In medicine, think about drugs which require a prescription in one country but can be bought over the counter in another. My favorite engineering example, which I explained in a couple of keynote speeches recently, is something I heard from my tech and automotive clients. Self-driving cars made in Germany already drive slightly differently from the ones programmed in China, and this difference is going to become bigger as vehicles become more and more autonomous. Once somebody notices these differences or builds awareness, as we say in leadership lingo, it is possible to turn this understandable mistake into a valuable skill. Managers who expect these kind of cultural differences between different locations become better observers of local conditions and the needs of negotiation partners from different cultures, for example. That is the beginning of the essential skill set of product or service localization, making sure that clients or colleagues from a different culture connect just as well with the financial plan, regulation or product as people at its culture of origin. The three mistakes I'm presenting in this video follow the same sequence as they usually unfold as managers get used to working across cultures. Once they overcome the first mistake of dismissing cultures altogether, it is very easy to fall straight into the second one. The second mistake is the assumption that, cultures are important in these seemingly objective professional fields, but that one of the cultures involved is right and the other one's wrong. Working across East and West, usually Europe and Asia, I often encounter these cases of mild superiority complex, when someone claims that Germans are naturally better at engineering, or that the traditionally harmonious indirect culture of China is superior to Western straightforwardness in business negotiations. People make these questionable assumptions for the same reason as they deny the importance of culture in the first place: to stay a bit longer in their cultural comfort zones, or in the language of psychology, to avoid cognitive dissonance. All right, they say to themselves, so there are different ways to do banking or build cars. But surely one of these ways must be the correct one. As human nature goes, this kind of internal monologue often reaches the conclusion that the familiar culture is the correct one, which the other, culturally different side must follow or copy. But business is not philosophy where the ultimate goal is truth. In business, the goal is to get things done, of course, in a legally and ethically compliant way. This means that in the world of management and leadership, judging another culture can lead to failure even if it feels right. I realize this every time I drive across the border between Austria and Italy. On the Austrian side, people typically drive by following road signs and regulations. On the Italian side, they often ignore signs but pay very close attention to the behavior of other drivers. Again, this is another example to what we call in intercultural workshops task-focused versus people-focused behavior. Now, from a police authority's perspective, one of these driving cultures is superior to the other. And personally, you might like one of the driving styles better than the other. But if you blindly follow the line on the street in Rome, or you try to wiggle your way into heavy traffic in Vienna, you might cause an accident in either case. This is why smart drivers, which I am trying to be, adjust their driving style slightly when they cross the border in either direction. Similarly, when they negotiate international deals or lead culturally diverse teams, managers with the right cultural awareness try to forget about the question which culture is right and instead try to see the project or the deal from the other side's perspective, make slight adjustments, and see what brings the desired results. This is the point in a manager's intercultural journey where it's very easy to make the third basic mistake, which is confusing cultural adaptation with cultural imitation. Stressful cultural situations are a little bit like the first day at school. The newcomer sees people go about their business but doesn't really understand what the rules are. But human beings have a very strong desire to belong. We even have brain cells called mirror neurons, whose only job is to help us, as the name says, mirror other people's actions or even emotional state. We cannot help but look up ourselves if a lot of people are looking at the third floor balcony in the street. We laugh with others even if we don't get the joke, and we become nervous if somebody's body language shows discomfort. Unfortunately, in cross-cultural situations, this instinct easily turns international business people into clumsy copies of each other's traditions. I saw meetings go wrong at the start this way, between people from a handshaking culture and another culture where bowing is the standard greeting. In China, where I spent 20 years training and coaching international managers, including Chinese managers, many foreigners adamantly try to do business the Chinese way, only to confuse their local employees or clients or suppliers who understandably expect them to behave like a foreigner. In extreme cases, imitating the outward behavior of an unknown culture can even become comical or offensive. Just ask any Japanese manager about foreigners trying to bow properly. To avoid this mistake, managers must remember that the success of working together with people from other cultures, just like the success of any human cooperation, doesn't require uniformity. In fact, most functional groups require a certain level of diversity. If you're curious about this, see the link to my video, What is Diversity? People work together best when their goals are shared, but their talents and skills are different. As they focus on the common goal, they almost naturally start playing different roles. Roles like explorers and caretakers, planners and implementers, innovators and evaluators, and so on. Businesses that build bridges between cultures have an advantage because they involve people with different strengths. Global car companies whose managers I support, they can harness 100 years of tradition of building cars in Germany, Italy's genius in design, and China's ruthless efficiency in manufacturing these cars more efficient and faster. Similarly, successful international managers I know, they put a lot of effort into figuring out what their own personal and cultural strengths are. They observe to find out what role the other side intends for them and figure out how to connect the two. The same manager can play the role of a disruptive visionary at a European business meeting and that of a cautious evaluator in Asia. That is because human behavioral traits like risk tolerance, flexibility, empathy, or detail orientation are never black and white categories. Between these extremes, individual managers have countless ways to find the best behaviors that fit their personal temperament and cultural background. And once they find their fit, they can experiment and see what works best in an unfamiliar culture, which in business means what brings the best results. For over 20 years of coaching, training, and advisory, I had the privilege of supporting thousands of executives, investors, entrepreneurs, diplomats, and even academics work between cultures constructively. If you're interested in my coaching, in my workshops and speeches, in other words, working together with me, please check the show notes for links where you can message me or you can book a free inquiry call. I also included links to resources like my book, books that I mentioned in this video, and to my other relevant videos. I really hope this was useful and hope to work together in the future. Find me online and drop me a line.